rationalization really is the focus of the movie Dishonesty, The Truth About Lies. And it's a really interesting movie, I think, which is a 2015 documentary about Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral economist from Duke University. The movie is by a documentarian, Yael Melamed, and actually it was pretty interesting. About 2 years ago, I tried to get Dan Ariely to come to campus, and he wasn't doing these speeches at that time. And he said, well, I can't come to campus, but you might want to contact this documentarian, Yael Melamed. And I contacted her and had her on campus in 2018. And she showed the movie Dishonesty, The Truth About Lies, and led a discussion and did a fabulous job. So let's talk about Dan Ariely and his research and really what the movie does. And we can really break the movie into two different themes. Ariely's research on rationalization, what he calls the fudge factor, and stories about people who cheated. So Ariely had this really interesting experiment, and he did it with thousands upon thousands of participants. Basically, it was a matrix with all these different numbers that you had to pick the two numbers that added up to 10 on this 4x3 matrix. And you had 5 minutes to do it. Typically, in 5 minutes, the average person could do around 4. Interestingly enough, they declared they got 6 right. And here's why. Because what they would do is they would be paid $1 for each correct question that they got correct. They were given 5 minutes, and then after 5 minutes, they went up to the proctor. They declared how many questions they got correct. They got paid that money, and then they shredded the quiz. They shredded the test without ever being inspected, or so they thought. And actually, it looked like they were being shredded, but afterwards they just shredded the kind of edges of the document. They were able to kind of check to see how many people declared the number they got right versus how many they actually got right. And Ariely's experiment looks at, what about big cheaters? There are some people who, because they knew they weren't going to get checked because there was no internal controls, they would go and say, oh yeah, sure, I got 20 out of 20 right, give me $20 and you're not going to be able to test this. Interesting, they didn't lose much money on that. Out of all their experiments, 30, 40,000 people, there was only 20 really big cheaters, and they lost a couple $100 out of that. Where they lost the big amount of money was people who had a fudge factor. They got 4, but they said they got 6 right. And that's where they lost thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars. So we see what impact that small levels of cheating had on the economic impact of this experiment. And the interesting thing is that people could do that and still feel good about themselves. They didn't think they were bad people. They thought, oh, well, I got 4, but I was distracted or something was happening out there, so I'm sure I could have gotten 6. So yeah, I'm almost sure I got 6. Yeah, I got 6. And we convince ourselves, but we still think that we're good people. They also break the stories down into a number of different individuals. We talked about Kelly Williams Bowler, who's a mother from Akron, who lied about where she lived. She said that she was living in her father's house, and she did that in order to send her kids to a better school. And again, we can imagine how a mother or how any parent might come up with that rationalization. Tim Donahue was an NBA referee who knew how referees were going to be calling a game, whether it was going to be tight or loose, or how, given the stars that might be on a certain team, what kind of calls they might get. Then to be able to look at the Las Vegas betting line and say, oh, well, they've got this team is favored to win by this amount of points, but given these referees, it's really going to be much better than that. So he took that knowledge and he was in cahoots with a couple different people and actually with the mob, unbeknownst to him, about placing the bets on the different games. Joe Papp was a professional cyclist who was using performance-enhancing drugs, and the interesting thing they said about him was his performance went up between 12 and 15% based on doping, and how that is a tremendous, tremendous difference in a sport that's really determined by seconds and fractions of seconds. Garrett Bauer was a professional stockbroker who basically worked with a lawyer who was working on all these big deals, and he knew who was going to be buying who, where the mergers were coming out, and he was giving Garrett Bauer this information. They were then basically buying and selling the stock based on that. And somebody said, it's like, you know, what's going to be tomorrow's news today. And they both went to prison for that. Erica Nelson is the wife who cheated on her husband by using the website Ashley Madison. Marilee Jones was the dean of admissions at MIT. She was caught exaggerating on her resume, where she went to college, and whether she was holding herself out as a PhD. Walter Pavlo was a bill collector at MCI, and the company had encouraged him to hide some bad debt. And after he started doing that, he said, well, you know, even if I do that, I can probably come up with some kind of deal with these companies that if they pay me pennies on the dollar, I'll tell them that this is a scheme to get them out of their debt. And he made millions on that, and he went to prison also. Final person I wanted to talk about was Ryan Holding, who was this PR and marketing expert who engaged in this guerrilla marketing campaign to promote a book that was called, and a movie called, I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. It was by a guy named Tucker Max. And basically, his deal was to incite protests to manufacture news stories that ultimately increased attendance at the movies and the book purchasing. And it was a really interesting but kind of questionable way of creating the news, and whether this was actual or not. These are the characters and these are the themes of the readings for the week. I hope you enjoy the movie, and I hope you enjoy the readings. I'm looking forward to hearing your or to reading your participation on the discussion board.